We know when the pyramids were built. We know who was buried inside them, roughly how many people it took, and what they ate while they worked. That is the exception for most of what our ancestors left behind. We have the object and nothing else. A machine with 30 bronze gears sitting on the seafloor for 2,000 years. A city carved 18 floors into rock with no bodies and no explanation. A temple older than farming, older than pottery, older than the wheel, buried on purpose. Or maybe not on purpose. And that argument is now happening between the people digging it up. 5 sites, 5 questions nobody has answered, and in 2 of them, the answer we had for decades fell apart in the last 18 months. We start with the one that broke the timeline. Roughly 95% of the site is still in the ground. Every answer so far has arrived attached to a new problem. In 1963, in the Cappadocia region of central Turkey, a man was renovating his house. He knocked through a wall in the basement and found a passage behind it. The passage led to a room. The room led to a corridor. The corridor led down. What he had opened was Derinkuyu, 18 levels cut into volcanic rock, reaching about 85 meters below the surface. Enough space, by the most cited estimate, for 20,000 people, plus their livestock and their food stores. The scale is not the interesting part, the engineering is. The rock here is ignimbrite, compacted volcanic ash, soft enough to carve, with iron tools, hard enough to hold a ceiling once carved. That combination is why anything got dug at all. But knowing you can dig is not the same as knowing how to keep 20,000 people breathing 80 meters down. Derinkuyu has more than 50 ventilation shafts running from the surface to the deepest levels. They are positioned so that air moves through the complex by convection rather than by anything mechanical. Temperature at depth stays around 13 degrees year-round, which also makes the lower levels usable for storing grain and wine. There are wells sunk from inside, so water could be drawn without exposing anyone above ground. And some wells do not connect to the surface at all, so the supply could not be poisoned from outside. Then there are the doors, circular stone slabs up to 1.5 meters across and weighing several hundred kilograms, set into recesses in the corridors. They roll across to seal a passage, and they move only from the inside. Each one has a hole through the center, narrow, at chest height, aimed down the corridor the attacker would be standing in. This is not a shelter improvised in a hurry. It is a fortification with a doctrine. Somebody worked out what a siege of this place would look like, then built for it, floor by floor, over a very long time. And that is where it stops making sense. We do not know who started it. The earliest construction is usually credited to the Phrygians around the 8th or 7th century BC, though that attribution rests on regional context rather than anything found inside. It was expanded in the Byzantine period, when Cappadocian Christians used it during Arab raids. There are chapels, a cruciform church on one of the lower levels, and a room described as a theological school. Those uses are documented, and they are late. They tell you who used an existing hole, not who dug it. We do not know what the original builders were hiding from. Something persistent enough to justify 18 floors of rock removal, and dangerous enough that the design assumes the enemy gets inside the corridors. We do not know how much of it exists. Derinkuyu connects by tunnel to Göbekli, another underground city several kilometers away. Estimates of the total number of underground settlements in Cappadocia run past 200. Most have never been mapped, and there are almost no bodies. For a refuge that supposedly sheltered 20,000 people across centuries, the human remains are thinly represented. Whatever they were hiding from most of the time, it seems they survived it and went back up. In 1900, sponge divers sheltering from a storm anchored off the island of Antikythera, between Crete and mainland Greece. One of them went down to look around and came back up, saying he had seen a pile of dead bodies on the seabed. They were bronze statues, the wreck of a Roman-era cargo ship, sunk somewhere around 70 to 60 BC, carrying looted Greek art. Over the following year, the divers brought up statues, glassware, coins, jewelry, the largest haul of ancient objects recovered from the sea to that point. Among the crates of material sent to Athens was a lump of corroded bronze the size of a large book. It sat in the National Archaeological Museum for months. Then it cracked open on its own as it dried, and inside there was a gear with triangular teeth, cut by hand in a device that had been underwater since before the Roman Empire existed. It took most of the 20th century to understand what it was. X-ray work in the 1970 seconds, then CT scanning in the 2000s, And finally, high-resolution surface imaging produced a reconstruction most researchers now accept in outline. The Antikythera Mechanism was an astronomical calculator. You turned a crank on the side to set a date. On the front, pointers showed the position of the sun and the moon against the zodiac, and a small rotating ball displayed the moon's phase. The moon pointer did not move at a constant speed. It used a pin and slot arrangement between two gears mounted slightly off-center, which makes the pointers speed up and slow down through the month. That is a mechanical model of the moon's elliptical orbit, built roughly 1700 years before Kepler described the mathematics of it. On the back were two spiral dials. One tracked the Metonic cycle, the 19-year period after which the phases of the moon returned to the same calendar dates. The other tracked the Saros cycle, an 18-year period that allows eclipses to be predicted. The eclipse dial does not just say that an eclipse is coming. Inscriptions on it note the expected hour, and in some cases the color. At least 30 gears survive. The original count was probably higher. Nothing of comparable mechanical complexity appears again in the archaeological record for well over 1,000 years. The standard framing has always been that this proves the ancient Greeks were further along than we credit them, that this is a window onto a lost tradition of precision engineering. In 2025, that framing got complicated. A team of Argentinian researchers built a physics simulation of the mechanism using the published measurements of the surviving gears, including their triangular tooth profile and the small inaccuracies recorded in the scans. They ran it. It jammed. In their model, the accumulated errors caused teeth to disengage and the train to slip. The device could be advanced roughly 4 months before it needed to be reset. Not a working instrument, a thing that looks like one and stops. The researchers are careful about what this means, and so should we. Their input is a 2,000-year-old object that has been sitting in seawater. Corrosion warps bronze. The measured gear geometry may not be the manufactured gear geometry. If the original teeth were a fraction of a millimeter different, the simulation result changes. So the question is open, and it is a stranger question than before. Either the ancient world built a working computational instrument 15 centuries ahead of anything that followed, or it built something that looked exactly like one and did not quite work, and someone paid for it anyway. On Crete, between roughly 1800 and 1450 BC, there was a civilization with running water, multi-story buildings, fresco painting of a quality that would not be matched in Europe for 1,000 years, and a bureaucracy that wrote things down. We call them the Minoans. That is not their name. We have no idea what their name was because we cannot read anything they wrote. They used 2 scripts. The later one, Linear B, was deciphered in 1952 by Michael Ventris, an English architect working outside the academic establishment. Ventris did something specific and clever. He built grids of sign frequencies and positions, looking for patterns in how signs combined, and tested the results against place names he expected to appear on Cretan tablets. The signs resolved into an early form of Greek. The tablets turned out to be inventories, sheep counts, chariot wheels listed as serviceable or not, rations of grain issued to named workers, bureaucratic to the point of tedium and readable. Linear A is the older script. Same island, same broad sign shapes, many signs identical to Linear B, and it does not work. Here is the strange part, and it is worth being precise about it. We can pronounce Linear A because so many signs carry over into Linear B, and because we know the sound values of the Linear B signs, we can look at A, Linear a tablet, and say approximately what noise it makes. We just have no idea what any of it means. The words that come out are not Greek. They are not Semitic in any form. Anyone has confirmed. They are not Anatolian, not Egyptian, not Etruscan, despite each of those being proposed and argued at length. The language behind Linear A does not appear to be related to anything we know. We do have footholds. Many Linear 8 texts are also administrative, and the numerical system is understood, since numbers are numbers regardless of language. We can identify what look like commodity headings, running, totals, transaction records, On some tablets, we can tell that a quantity of something was received and a quantity was dispersed. We cannot say what the something was. There is also a recurring formula, usually transliterated asasaraim, that appears on ritual objects across multiple sites. It appears on ritual objects and never on inventories. Suggestions have ranged from the name of a deity to a dedicatory phrase to a formula equivalent to a blessing. There is no way to test any of them. The obstacle is material. About 1400 linear A inscriptions survive, and most are short. A few signs, an entry on a clay tablet fired by accident when a building burned. The total surviving corpus of linear A amounts to a few thousand words. Champollion cracked Egyptian hieroglyphs with the Rosetta Stone, a long text repeated in a language already known. There is no Rosetta Stone for linear A. There may never have been one, so a literate, wealthy, technologically sophisticated society that traded across the Eastern Mediterranean for 4 centuries left us its paperwork. And we can sound it out, and it means nothing. Around 1200 BC, the Eastern Mediterranean held the most connected group of societies the world had yet produced. Egypt under the New Kingdom, the Hittite Empire across Anatolia, Mycenaean Palace states in Greece, Assyria and Babylonia in Mesopotamia, Ugarit and the Canaanite cities on the Levantine coast, Cyprus supplying copper. They traded tin from Central Asia, exchanged diplomatic correspondence in Akkadian as a shared second language, married into each other's royal families, and complained to each other in writing about shipments arriving late. Within roughly 50 years, most of it was gone. No conquest, no replacement. Gone. The Hittite Empire ceased to exist and was not succeeded by anything. Raiders burned its capital Hattusa, and the empire's name survived in fragments until archaeologists found the city again in 1906. Every significant Mycenaean palace was destroyed. Greek literacy disappeared. Linear B stopped being written. And Greece did not have writing again for around 400 years. Ugarit was burned and never reoccupied. Egypt survived, but contracted and lost its position in the Levant for good. Cities that had stood for centuries were leveled and left. Trade routes that had moved tin across a continent stopped. Long-distance exchange in the region did not recover to Bronze Age levels for centuries. The obvious question is, what did it? Every proposed answer is either insufficient on its own or has a dating problem. The Sea Peoples are the traditional culprit. Egyptian inscriptions at Medinet Habu describe a coalition arriving by land and sea, and Ramesses Sarai claims to have defeated them. The trouble is that the texts are propaganda written by the winner. The names of the groups are hard to match to known populations, and the more researchers examine them, the more the Sea Peoples look like a symptom rather than a cause. Displaced people moving because their own homes had already failed. Climate is the strongest current candidate. Pollen cores from the Sea of Galilean sediment from Cyprus indicate a severe prolonged drought, beginning around 1250 BC. Correspondence from the period supports it. Letters from the Hittite king requesting grain shipments from Egypt in language that reads as urgent. But drought alone does not explain systematic destruction by fire across cities hundreds of kilometers apart. Researchers have proposed earthquakes, a seismic storm along the Pal, an Anatolian fault system, a sequence of major quakes over decades. There is destruction layer evidence consistent with earthquakes at several sites. There is not evidence at all of them. The explanation gaining the most ground now is not a single cause but fragility. These states were interdependent to an unusual degree. Bronze requires copper and tin came from thousands of kilometers away, along routes that crossed multiple political borders. Palace economies concentrated production and distribution in a single administrative center. Efficient while it runs, catastrophic when it burns. Break enough links, and the network does not degrade gracefully. It unravels. Drought reduces yields. Reduced yields strain a palace system that cannot absorb a bad decade. Strain produces migration. Migration produces raiding. Raiding disrupts the trade routes that the bronze supply depends on. Bronze shortage weakens the states further. Each failure makes the next one more likely. That is a plausible story. It is not a proven one. What we have is a 60-year window in which a civilization-scale system that had worked for 500 years stopped working across an entire region permanently. 5 sites. What connects them is not that they are strange. It is what they are missing. Göbekli Tepe has no writing. The Antikythera Mechanism has no manufacturer, no workshop, no second example. Derinkuyu has no bodies, and no founding record. Linear A has writing and no language. The Bronze Age collapse has 100 cities in ruins and no account of what happened from anyone who was there. In every case, the object survived and the explanation did not. That is the ordinary condition of the ancient world. The pyramids are not the rule. They are the rare case where enough context survived that we can tell the story. Everywhere else we are looking at the parts we happen to be left and building the rest from inference. 95% of Göbekli Tepe is still in the ground.